All right, welcome to our Pathways webinar. This is going to be a pretty casual conversation, not too much structured content, so feel free to utilize the chat function on free conference call, or if, for some reason it's been an hour and I don't realize you asked a question, feel free to unmute yourself. My name is Stefanie. Sorry, I'm not using my webcam right now. It's been a hot day in San Francisco and my hair is not looking that great. So you can, see the picture of me on the Eventbrite page. Tonight we're going to be addressing some common roadblocks that I've discovered with Pathways through talking with club officers, and also share some tips for success. Since it seems like it's a pretty small group, I'm sure we'll have time to address all of your questions and concerns. I do want to note a couple of disclaimers. This is not a complaint about the interface session. I can take comments and give them to Toastmasters International, but I don't have any control over that, so we're going to be solution-oriented in this session. Let's see. And we'll also be doing a lot of hands-on demonstration in Basecamp, so you'll be able to ask some questions along the way. To give you an idea of what we'll be talking about this evening, so again, you can type in the chat if there's anything in particular you want to focus on, or anything to add to this list, which we'll go over next. But the first thing that I want to do is to do a brain dump for everyone that is in this webinar. If you would like to type into the chat why you have joined the webinar, if there's something in particular you're looking to get out of this hour together, or any topics that you want to bring up. Let me go ahead and just give a second in the chat to see. And we also don't usually announce dignitaries on the call, but Kalidas is also on the webinar. He's our District 4 Program Quality Director. So Kalidas, if you see some questions or comments in the chat that I'm not addressing, feel free to make an announcement or text me. All right, I'm just going to jump into content then, and you can, if you feel inspired to ask a question. I know many of you have had a long work day, so feel free to watch this webinar again later. I'll have my contact information at the end if you need more personal assistance. That's kind of the purpose of this slide that we're on right now. The Pathways Committee on District 4 isn't necessarily new, but we have some specific goals that we've been identifying along the way. If you have any interest in joining the Pathways Committee, it's a pretty small committee right now, but it's everyone that's dedicated to moving towards 100% Pathways adoption before June 30th, and helping others move in that direction in a positive fashion. A couple of our goals: doing some researching, which I've been focusing the last 2 weeks on, identifying common roadblocks. After that, we're currently in the middle of developing resources that are specific for members, for officers, for mentors, for area directors that are visiting the clubs, so everyone is on the same page, and also promoting the email address pathways@d4tm.org for any District 4 related questions. Because we as in the district have been spending a lot of time focusing on promoting resources, sending out videos and articles released from Toastmasters International, this Pathways Committee is going to be more of a concierge. So it'll be more of a grassroots approach to assisting clubs, meaning it's instead of blasting out several resources that we think would be helpful, we're hoping to individually assist clubs and officers with whatever questions that they have, because now we're recognizing that several officers and members still aren't getting on the Pathways, and we want to know why. And lastly, of course, being a liaison, if there are any concerns, to pass along to World Headquarters. They now have a Pathways-specific task force, so that's relatively new as in the last couple of months, I believe, they used to direct all the questions to their education and membership department, but now since everyone has rolled into Pathways, they're really focusing on taking feedback, exploring what's working for members, what's not, and making improvements from there. Okay, looks like there's no questions yet. I briefly mentioned reaching out to club officers in the last 2 weeks and individually responding. We've gotten some fantastic feedback. This is an example of an email that was sent to every single club officer in the district asking for more personal stories of what's worked in terms of adopting Pathways and what challenges club officers are facing. So the next slide will summarize my findings. It's taken me a couple of weeks to get through all the emails, but it's been fantastic. I've received over 100 replies back with officers detailing what they want to pass along to other clubs. So it's been quite an amazing journey. Some numbers for those of you who are more statistically inclined. If you attended our District 4 Toastmasters Leadership Institute a couple of months ago, these were some numbers that I shared. I think this was back in August that I shared this. The adoption rates for District 4 specifically, the definition of adoption means someone has selected their path. So this is a common misconception, which I'll get to a little bit later. For new members, it means just because they get the email saying that they have access to Pathways, it doesn't mean that they're considered adopted. They must select a path. So in District 4, as of July 25th, these are our adoption rates. And you'll see a couple of months later, we improved slightly. We're still not quite there yet, but our numbers are increasing. And now we're hoping to move towards, I would say, even 70 or 75% by the end of the year. Ideally 100, but we can get into it a little bit later. Why some clubs might not quite make that mark yet. And if you would like to compare, these are the average adoption rates as of the same dates as the last slide for across the world. So you can see District 4 is a little bit below average, not drastically so, but this is something that I would at least like to do just to be above the curve. All right, some common roadblocks, I believe, before we actually jump into the system. And while I'm addressing some roadblocks, it would also be helpful for those who are on this webinar, even if you don't have any specific questions you would like to address, it would be good to know how long you've been in Toastmasters, if you've only known Pathways, if you previously used the legacy program, just kind of where you are in your education journey. That'll help me cater to discussion about the legacy program versus Pathways. If the majority of attendees right now have already been in the system or need help logging in, so that in itself would be helpful. Now, some of the common roadblocks that I have discovered in speaking one-on-one with many club officers are as follows. And a lot of these are not ones that I necessarily expected, which is why I loved talking to club officers one-on-one through email. It gave me additional information. It validated the purpose of the committee, which is not just to send out resources that we think would be helpful, but actual practical advice that is working in the field. First and foremost, showing versus telling. And before I do that, actually, let me see if there's any. Oh, okay, great. Yeah, so Harry, I think I answered your question. For those of you who aren't familiar with the free conference call platform, on your little panel, you should see a box in the lower, I believe, right corner, or at least in your toolbar, you'll see an icon that says chat. So if you click that, you can get into the chat where you can message everyone. And if you still can't find it, feel free to unmute yourself. So I want to make sure that everyone has their questions answered. some of the most common roadblocks that I've seen: showing versus telling. Some clubs are already doing this, but the majority are not, and that's mostly because for the same reason that the district had been, and even Toastmasters International had been sending out, you know, top 10 best practices or the most common helpful resources, because this was the easiest way to communicate what information we thought would be most helpful. And instead, what I've been finding is the clubs that have the highest adoption rates are the ones that have their officers or mentors sitting down with their members on a one-on-one basis and saying, hey, Kalidas, why don't you log into Pathways? Oh, you don't know how to log into Pathways? Let's walk through it together. Let's focus on selecting your path, going through a project. This seems to be more effective than giving a group presentation, because if you're watching a group presentation, there's no guarantee that your audience will go and listen to your call to action. Maybe something will come up at work. So that's why assisting one-on-one will make sure that your members are actually picking their path, and they can ask questions in real time. Some misconceptions that I've heard about Pathways, which will be resolved in a couple of months, but another one of our committee's goals is to answer as many questions as possible and to get in front of all of our members before the end of the calendar year. We want to avoid as many questions as possible by the time the legacy program ends on June 30th, 2020. And by the legacy program ending, I just mean members won't be able to apply for credits through that program. So even though someone is working on the legacy program, trying to get their competent communicator, competent leader designations before June 30th, they can still sign on to Pathways. They won't lose their credit up until that point for the legacy program, so they can still work towards their Distinguished Toastmaster, their DTM, through that way. And they can still take their path and be able to mentor new members. So that point seems to help, especially if members are resistant to signing on to Pathways because they don't plan to do that after June 30th, or you know, they really want to focus on their legacy track. It's a good reminder that the tenured members who have been in the club for a while are the ones that new members look up to. And even if you're not an expert, even if you're not going on the path, just the act of going through this process with your new members really does mean a lot to them, and they will follow in your footsteps. Also, I mentioned that, in case you joined late, adoption means that someone has selected their path. So even if a new member has received an email saying they have access to Pathways, it doesn't mean that they have officially adopted the program. They need to actually select their path and start on it. Club culture. This is an interesting one. So the two bottom points, the roadblocks that I mentioned, are not related to Pathways, which may or may not be surprising to you. The clubs with the highest adoption rate, another commonality is the kind of culture that they've built in their club. Of course, we know all Toastmasters clubs has speeches, table topics, evaluations, but the feel, the environment, the atmosphere, the culture is different. Those clubs that build in a very positive culture, not just through the president and the officers, but every single member feels like it is a safe, supportive environment, those tend to be the members that ask more questions. The officers that aren't just bashing on Pathways and Toastmasters and the way things used to be, and instead promoting moving forward, promoting change, and focusing on the positive, that in itself tends to get members to buy in more to moving forward and utilizing Pathways. So we can talk more about how to instill a more positive club culture if you want to type that into the chat if that's something you're interested in discussing. And lastly, going back to basics. Even in my experience doing club officer training or leading sessions at district events, one of the biggest challenges, I mean, I feel like forever, has been getting members to actively participate in the club, to sign up for speeches, to not drop out last minute. So that's been more pronounced with the rollout of Pathways, but that still is a challenge. So that's why I'll also announce, I should have made a slide for this, but I can also navigate to our district website. We have a Toastmasters Leadership Institute coming up on December 7th, that's a Saturday, at Gilead, and any officers that are elected before then can attend officer training there. There you can get best practices on how to get members to sign up for speeches, scheduling ahead of time, pros and cons of doing that, much longer discussion for which we can have another webinar if that would be helpful, but this will focus just on the mechanics of Pathways. Okay. Any other questions? Doesn't seem that way. Okay. And I always like to take feedback at the end of the session, but even in the middle of the session, it's nice to have validation. If certain things are helpful or if they're not helpful, if it's things you already know, I won't be offended. This webinar really is for all of you, and I want to tailor it to what you would find most helpful. So actually navigating into the system. I'll walk through a couple of common roadblocks that I've seen so far and how to mitigate those issues. And hopefully this can help more than one of you on this webinar, or if you are watching the recording, the greater Toastmasters community. If you joined Toastmasters before Pathways was launched, you may or may not have ever signed into Toastmasters.org. This might be a new concept. To do that on Toastmasters.org, each member has an individual profile. And to get into that profile, you would click Login. Now, like I mentioned, every member that is dues paying has an account in here, whether they know it or not. The email address that's on file for you is whatever you gave when you signed up for the club. If you are a member and you're not sure which email you used, ask a club officer. There are also cases where if you have handwritten membership applications in your club, the officer that typed in your membership information could have spelled your email address wrong. We've seen that a couple of times. So if you're not receiving any communication from Toastmasters International, that might be the case. Or if you gave your work email but has since left the job and haven't switched to your Toastmasters or personal email, there could be a variety of different reasons why you might experience frustration trying to log into Toastmasters.org. If you do know your email, or if you want to give a certain email a try, you don't know your password, or if you're logging in for the first time, you can click Forgot Password, type in your email. You can try a few different ones if you're not sure which email you might have used, and you'll just go into your inbox, make sure to check your spam. If you still cannot get into Toastmasters.org, you can always call Toastmasters International directly. That's much more direct than asking your club officer, because they have full access to the system. The Contact Us button has their hours and phone number. They're in Mountain Time, very beneficial for U.S. Toastmasters, so you can check that out. Once you get logged in, and one of the best practices I'll talk about later is focusing on what exactly you're trying to do. I think if you get sucked into the rabbit hole of trying to click on everything, it gets overwhelming. This is with any website, not just Toastmasters. To get into what we call Basecamp, one way to do that is to click Pathways. This is everything you'll be able to know. I find that some members, or some people generally, like to have all the information up front. All the information does exist on there. Some people like to pour through everything. Others want to have a more direct, first do this, then do this. So it's an interesting experiment from Toastmasters International to accommodate all those different learning styles. For the purpose of this webinar, we'll go straight to Basecamp. That's where everything is located. Pardon me while I check once in a while to see if there's any questions. During the last TLI, I walked someone through this through these different, what do you call them, modules, panels, I guess, and that was helpful. If you have never chosen your path before, if this is your first time in Pathways, you can select your path by clicking here. There's an assessment that you can use to receive suggestions on which path best aligns with your goals. This is the main reason that Toastmasters International has rolled out Pathways, because in the legacy program, of course, the competent communicator and competent leader manuals were the same for everyone. This is similar in the sense that level 1 of Pathways is similar for everyone, but it gets everyone on a more customized path earlier in their journey. I won't go through this whole assessment, but if you have questions about this, I'm happy to help if you want to contact me for personal assistance afterwards. Like I said, you can take the assessment, but you don't have to follow those suggestions. You can always pick a different one if you find that another one works better for your journey. The newest path, there used to be 10 when Pathways first rolled out, and now there's a humorous speaking path. So personally, I'm excited to see which other paths are rolled out in the next couple of years. All right, we'll go back to the page we were on before. The navigator is, I feel like, a brain dump of all the information you can possibly know about Toastmasters. This is particularly helpful if you are a brand new member and don't know anything about Toastmasters. This will at least guarantee that each member in the club has access to the same onboarding information about what Toastmasters is, what the meetings are supposed to be like, what the brand really is. Because if you have been in Toastmasters and a member of different clubs, the way that Toastmasters as an organization and as a program is communicated can vary. So this is another benefit of doing everything electronically versus, mailing out papers to every single member, which is to ensure that the brand is consistent, the expectation of what Toastmasters is consistent. So I won't go through the navigator, but it's a great resource for members and officers. The main thing that we'll go through is accessing your path through Basecamp. Fortunately, I am a president of one of my clubs, so I have access to Basecamp Manager, but if you do not have back-end administrative access for your club, you're not a club officer, you can just go directly to Basecamp. All right, so again, there's a lot of clicky things on here. It is not yet mobile friendly, but we'll make do with this for now. Navigating Basecamp, again, I feel is very similar to the navigator where a ton of information is on there. Personally, I just look at a couple of panels that suit what I'm trying to work on. And a couple of different clicky things do the same, take you to the same place, so you might find yourself in a loop. But the main things that we'll focus on is how to access your path and how to see the different projects. And also review a couple of frequently asked questions. I won't do a deep dive because I do want to save some time for questions at the end and focus on what our webinar attendees here want to hear about. I would say the most useful thing that you'll click on is the education transcript. You'll see that there is a very similar education transcript here. You can either click on one of these or your education transcript. Most members will just have their path or paths that they've selected here. By the way, one additional caveat to choosing your path is you're able to change your path within 30 days of selecting it if you find that you click through the projects and you don't like it. But after the 30 days, you're locked into that and you can always purchase another path. So let's just click on this for the sake of seeing what this does. My education transcript here, I have a bunch of other stuff that I would not worry about because those are more administrative things. The dynamic leadership path is what I'm working on right now. So I can either click on the name of the path or I can open curriculum. You'll see a couple of other drop-down menus here that I think are just, what do you call it? Oops. Inherent in the platform that is being used here. So we can click Open Curriculum. Admittedly, you can see that I've skipped around a little bit here, which is a new development. What another common, I guess, complaint that we receive about Pathways is something that has been changed in the last, I believe, 2 months, which is you can now look ahead to your different paths and work on those different projects. So an example would be maybe you are finished with level 1, you're on level 2, but a speech that you are planning to give doesn't really match any of these projects and you want to work on an elective project instead. You can now do that, and you don't have to wait until a previous level is finished before moving on in your journey. It used to be you have to finish level 1 before you can unlock and see level 2, and I understand the thinking behind that, just to prevent everyone from skipping to the last project without going through these basics. But because this is such a huge request across the world, this was something that they decided to incorporate. We'll go through, let's see. So as an example, say level 1, sorry, I know I'm doing a lot of clicking around. I'm happy to go back if anyone needs it. So right now, as an example, you can see that I have finished everything that I need to do for level 1. So I've completed 3 of these line items, but I'm missing the last one, which is pending completion approval. So this means an officer of my club, the president and vice president, I believe, whoever has access, has not gone in and approved my my level. So originally, if they hadn't done that, I wouldn't be able to move on to level 2, but now I can move on to level 2 while following up with my VPE at the club to get that approved. Let's say I'm working on level 2. You can see I've completed 25% of it because I've done this one. Let's see what it's like to understand your leadership style. So once you launch the program, there are different learning tools that try to accommodate various learning styles. So you can read, you can download a checklist of what the expectations are. It's arguably more robust than the old manuals. You can get a sense of what competencies you'll need to master. Again, you can click through these different this different text. What you will need to do, however, to make sure before you finish your path is to complete the assess your skills before and after. Once that's done, you would just naturally click through everything, make sure you've answered all the questions and prompts. And once you get here, generally if I'm working on a project, I'll get to your evaluation, I'll print out my evaluation resource, and I'll quit out of this. And once I quit out of this, this will be called in progress. So I think the different levels of status is not activated, meaning you haven't even clicked activate, or you haven't even touched this, so this would look like this. So lead in any situation, I have not even opened up to see what this is about. Once you do that, and you close out of that window, you'll automatically see launch, meaning you can revisit that project. I mean, to be honest, it doesn't really matter what's here or not. I kind of go by whether or not this little check mark is here. If it's not here, that means I have not finished that particular project, and I can go back to open it and mark it as complete. Once you click through everything, you've evaluated yourself, then it'll be marked as complete. Let's see, since that was a lot of information, let me see if there's any questions. Can you expand a little on submitting projects for approval, and what will the officers say? How do they approve? What happens if they don't, etc.? Yes. We'll go into Basecamp Manager, the Basecamp Manager interface after this. But essentially the process is once you complete all of these different projects, so for example, level 1, you can see that I have a check mark here, here, and here, meaning I have finished level 1, great. So now I just basically keep clicking on this until it says pending completion approval, and that means one of your Basecamp managers in your club needs to approve that you've given all your speeches, that everything is good to go. In Basecamp Manager, there will be a list of members that need their levels approved, and they would do it that way. The consequence of that is more that you wouldn't receive credit for the level. It wouldn't be counted towards your achievements, but that's very similar to if you were on the legacy program, your officers still had to submit your your designations and approve your projects before you get credit for it. Let me know if that didn't answer your question. Do you submit for approval? Do they just get to see what's pending for approval based on your check marks? You have to submit for approval. So here you'll see, that's that example. Pending prior training, you'll see that this is not yet, I'm not able to submit this yet because I have not finished these 2 projects. Once that's done, I think it's interesting. I hope that they do automate it in the future, which is I think what you're getting at, that you do have to say, okay, I'm done with level 2 now, I'm ready for you to approve it. They won't just automatically see, oh, Stefanie's done with level 2, let me go approve it. You have to push it into the system so that they can see it in their Basecamp Manager interface. Oh, it looks like Stefanie is requesting credit for level 2, let me go ahead and mark that off. All right, another common question I get asked, last thing. Another question I get asked is what to do with your evaluations, which is another good question. Before I get into where you can upload your evaluations, since we encourage that everyone does things digitally, whether you want to have someone evaluate you, on the computer or print it out, you can see all evaluations here. This didn't always used to be here, but I think it's kind of cool if you have, like an hour of free time to kind of click through all of these. I know some Toastmasters that will print a copy of this and keep it in a binder in their club or have several copies on hand. I think there's a general one here somewhere where you can just, generic evaluation resource, where you can just have that available for your members so they can speak from a specific Pathways project. And that's more just to make sure that they have a goal that they're working on, that they're keeping in mind, not to just give speeches for the practice of it, but to really hone in on something that they want to improve. What else was I going to say here? Another piece of feedback that I've heard about the project is frustration with, say, for example, I'm working on level 2, dynamic leadership. Okay, I did not go through the right thing right there, but this is essentially it's the same function. It's just a summary of the whole, my whole path and all the possibilities. Like if I wanted to expand every single little thing, this is what it would look like, and that what I have and have not activated. Again, this is something that is easier if you have a buddy or if you have a club officer that's willing to walk you through with this. If you are in the middle of your workday, this is probably not the first thing that you want to be doing in your day. So just kind of make it a group activity. It's not fun to experience confusion and frustration alone, but figuring it out together, I think that helps to build that positive club culture we were talking about. Okay, I guess we'll have to click on Open Your Curriculum. So I was saying that one of the pieces of feedback I've heard is, say, right now I need to work on understanding your leadership style and introduction to Toastmasters mentoring. And I've not been in club leadership, for example. I'm a brand new member, and I say I have not been a Toastmasters mentor before. I can't complete this project, or I don't want to talk about leadership style. I think what's I think what could be clearer about this, but what as club officers you can encourage your members to do is be a little creative with these projects. So still talking about leadership style, but maybe in a different context, whether it's in parenting or at work or a lesson that you learned from a particular leadership style. So there's different ways. This isn't like cut and dry. It can seem that way, but I think the intent is you learn the skill by going through the module and then giving a speech on using your experiences and using your own stories. Okay, we are going back to evaluations. So that is how to view all the evaluations. Clicking on My Feedback. And again, most of what you'll need to know is in one of these buttons. I know there's some other clicky things here and some clicky things up here. I like to just use those main big boxes that are there. If anyone has experience with utilizing the feedback request feature, I'm open to hearing that feedback or hearing those stories in the chat. I was testing out this feature back in 2017, but no one's giving me feedback on my speech. That's okay. Instead, I spend a lot of time in the e-portfolio because I am a little OCD and I like to keep the uploads of all of my evaluations. You can do this. You can keep a binder of your printed and filled out evaluations, whatever method you choose. I would say just revisit what the intent is, what you're trying to achieve, and do what works for you. You might not want to upload everything on your computer. It might be extra work. As long as you read the evaluations, you get something out of it. This is just for personal use, I believe. So in documents, there's these predetermined folders here that you can upload your evaluations into. You can either take a picture or scan it in if you have a scanner at work or at home. This is definitely not a template. This is just an example of what I do. You can add a file in here. Hopefully there will be a better way to organize this, but this is kind of what it is now. Let me see if there are any other questions. Oh, okay, cool. I actually went to that without, I actually went through evaluations without having read the question, but if you did not get your question answered about loading in your evaluations, let me know. Another piece of feedback that I get is not having any sort of incentive to fill out functionary roles. So functionary roles can be kept track of to some degree in your profile, so you can say when was the last time you did all of these different roles. It's kind of a slippery slope because I think, no matter what education program is used, if there's no inherent desire to serve in the different roles or help out the club or to learn how to run a better meeting, it's kind of hard to convince someone even if they receive credit for it. Some of the Pathways projects you can give a speech on by serving in a functionary role. That's one of the ways that you can get creative with it. But there isn't like okay, you served as an odd counter, you've moved closer to becoming a DTM. That's just the same meeting structure that's always happened. You go to the meeting, you contribute to your community because you want to better that group. I'm happy to help out with some talk tracks if you do find that some members don't want to fill functionary roles, and that is really a hindrance to club operations. Okay, what else did I say I was going to talk about? I think I said I was also going to talk about Basecamp. So we have 20 minutes left officially. So I want to, okay, so Basecamp management and Club Central. I'll do Basecamp first. Can I get to Basecamp from here? Someone else probably knows this better than I do. Oh, I just discovered this right now. That made me really happy. Okay, like I mentioned, you can go to your other club if you were part of a second club and you're a Basecamp manager. I went through this earlier today, and to be quite frank, because the majority of benefit, if web developers have a set amount of time on their hands to improve the interface for the admin users or the front end member users, they definitely spent more time there. I have no doubt in my mind that this this Basecamp Manager will improve, but again, we'll go through what it entails for the time being. So the first little box is viewing pending requests. So this is one of the questions that was asked. If anyone in my club did submit a level to be approved, I would see it here. And there's some little help text here if you want to check that out. We won't go through specific tutorials yet, but member progress. So these reports are kind of interesting. One question that I got asked is, how can you see which members have and have not enrolled in Pathways? And I had to do a little digging for that information. I'll get to that after we finish doing the Basecamp Manager interface. But I did find that it took me some time to just wait for the reports to refresh. You could see, or it's refreshing all the reports now, but you'll be able to see here when was the last time your report's updated. For the longest time, I was like, there's no records, there's no paths, no one's on Pathways, but it was really just I had to wait until it finished loading. I would say even path progress is probably more useful. Yeah, it takes a little bit of time for this to load, but just be patient. So this is an example of, in my club, how many members have finished what different kinds of paths. I don't know what half a member is, but I guess that is the calibration that they use for this. So you're really not going to find, 3/4 of a member or something like that. So it'll be really 1, 2, and beyond that. Again, instructions here to take a look at the details, to be able to export, which I also think is a valuable part of Pathways, just having more visibility rather than having more visibility into each member's journey rather than it being kept in a manual that they maybe left at home or another officer that has since moved away and they kept all the records. So this way it's all centralized, being able to access it without having to depend on a small group of people. This is a lot to look at, but you can check this out on your free time if you are interested in seeing an example of what each member looks like. If you're a brand new member, this is going to give you a headache. So this is really just for Basecamp managers. I won't spend too much time on that. You can kind of click through all of these. Let's see, are there any questions on Basecamp Manager? Oh, okay. So, by the way, going back to the question, all the folders are already named, or you can name the folders and organize how you want. I have found that the folders are already named, which is why I was like, okay, well, I guess I'll upload everything into the specific level, but there is not yet the ability to create and organize your own folders. So you can either use those or create your own on your computer. Clicking your name in yellow once you log into Toastmasters. Yeah. See, there's so many ways to get to the same things. I think that's another thing that's like a double-edged, or not a double-edged sword, but like a blessing and a curse, where there's a lot of things that'll take you to the same place, but that also means there's a lot more possibilities to click on. Show which menus are active by clicking on them, and which need to have the mouse cursor hovering over in order to display. Harry, are you talking about Basecamp Manager, or like the ones up here, or like this little drop-down menu? Okay, I'll let you type there. But everything below this red bar, I have found that it's not like a hover drop-down. You have to click on it. Like this, I have to click on.
This I have to click on. All this I have to click on. Strangely enough, these are all dropped down. I hope someone fixes this because it's really annoying. But this is an automatic drop down, and then I click on this. So everything is eventually clicky, which I guess is part of the frustration, but I don't know. I like clicking on things. I'm just really weird. Why is my email Mike Fidel? Okay, whatever. That is Basecamp Manager. Before we get to questions, one more thing I want to add is about Club Central. Again, this is something that club officers have access to, so assuming not everyone on this webinar is a club officer, I won't go too in-depth. From Leadership Central, lots of stuff here, but what we're going to look at is Club Central. I'm going to click on that. And lots of different tools here, which you'll learn in Club Officer Training if you don't know what all of these do. What we're going to look at now is Club Roster. So I'm just going to quickly, what do you call it, kind of blur this. I don't want anyone's personal information on here. But you can see through there whether or not someone is Pathways enrolled or not through that interface. Let's see. Okay. Thank you. I think everyone's a little bit eccentric in Toastmasters. That's why I like it. I mean, spending our free time trying to, be better versions of ourselves, that's a very small percentage of the world. Okay, we're going to go back to my presentation. Navigating the system, some top tips that you can read, finding members in the club who can mentor others and have those one-on-one sessions so it's not always just the club officers, especially if there are newer members who are more tech-savvy because Pathways is everything that they have always known. Perhaps they can mentor other members. And I like to use the buddy system, or I guess some people call it the buddy system, especially if you're a new club and you might not feel like you're qualified to be a mentor, but you can be a buddy, or I don't know what other creative word you want to use. Also, being specific, and this is where I got to with a lot of officers, where they, if someone expresses frustration, confusion, being overwhelmed, I just start asking questions. I don't immediately try to problem solve if I don't know what the problem is. I'll ask, what are you trying to achieve? What are you looking to do? And then let's do it together. So of course I take feedback, but I will only take specific feedback. Picking a few resources, obviously there's a lot out there from Toastmasters International, from all these districts and officers that have come up with their own stuff. If you just Google it, Harry Holland has a very special talent for digesting more information than I can ever stomach, so you can always ask him who's on this webinar. And then lastly, recognition, shifting complaints into conversation. There are some, pins on the Toastmasters International store that you can buy to recognize members that have completed levels, so that's kind of a fun thing. You can also get ribbons. So yeah, those are a couple of tips of adoption. And now we're finally on our last slide, which is questions. So thank you to the who have been asking questions along the way in the chat. Let me revisit the chat to see if, okay, go to tutorials and resources. Yes, okay, I will go back to Basecamp Manager. And yes, Kalidas, our site is one of the best. I agree. If you want any further resources, actually let me go to that slide really quick. Sorry, again, a lot of dizzying window switching. Some of my favorite resources are on here. The District 4 website is cited as one of the best resources for pathways around the world. When I go to international convention, this is what people tell me is, what's helped them the most with pathways. c4tn.org, really quick. Let's see, you can see the banner of events. You can take a look at the December 7th event. I would highly recommend it. I will also be there if you have never met me in person. You can see a quick link to Pathways resources. I'm not going to go through all these, but you can take a look at some of what's been most helpful. Again, you can pick the format that works best for you. Personally, I cannot watch a video because I have a very short attention span, but I will go through a 2-page PDF, for example. So I would say to also utilize your other members' learning styles. If someone learns better by videos, you can send them a video. This is also a really great way to get to know your members, which was my favorite part about being Vice President of Education, getting to know each member, their goals, how they best learn, and what motivates them. So just kind of using that collective brain in your club. So there's that. Lots and lots of stuff. Okay, going back to Basecamp Manager, going to tutorials and resources. That was an automatic drop down and a click on that. Yeah, thanks, Carrie, for pointing this out. There are a ton of different tutorials, evaluation resources, project descriptions. For the most part, if someone comes up to me and says, you know, Pathways or Toastmasters should really have, you know, X, Y, and Z, chances are it exists and it involves some digging. But if you ask Toastmasters International, they're really great. So just by going to the Contact Us, you can call them. They'll redirect you to the correct department. I personally like talking to them. Or you can send them an email if you don't want to wait on the phone, and they'll send you an answer that you're looking for. So again, really just knowing what you're trying to achieve. You can see that there's a lot out there. I have definitely not looked at 1,700 resources, partly because some of them are in a language that I don't understand. So you can also test your, you know, bilingual skills here. Evaluation resources, project descriptions, resource documents. If there's a specific subject you wanted to click on, I'm happy to do that. But I want to see if there are any other questions. Let's see. Harry, I hope that answers your question. Or I guess it's not a question, it's a request, because you knew that exists. Tutorials. Okay. Click on tutorials. Great. So these are really great resources because when a feature is added to Pathways, I imagine Toastmasters International will, for the most part, update their videos. That's another headache if you work in software where you change one thing and then that means you have to change a million other things. But if you're looking for a short video on how to do access your completion certificate or complete a level, you can come here to tutorials and resources. Can you search for that? I believe you can search. Chat can be found on here. I think it's just more accessible to talk to someone. But again, this is another another learning style. Some people like to just scroll down and discover what's in here, kind of click around. You can even, if you have some time in your club and you have a last-minute speaker drop out, you can play one of. I should have asked Carrie to code lead this webinar. Wait, where's how to, wait, where's quick lessons? Oh, here, tutorial quick lessons, got it. And admittedly, I have not looked at all of these, but this is awesome. This is some, what do you call it, if you don't want to watch a video or if you're at work and you don't want your coworkers to give you weird looks, you can download this and read it, accessing speech evaluation resources. And just to reiterate, again, this is really catering to a lot of different learning styles, so by no means do you have to click through all of this. And I would encourage others in your club who have expressed being overwhelmed by how much there is out there, is just to say you don't have to know everything that's here. I'm still learning, and I've been in Toastmasters for how many years? So that's kind of the beauty of it. But again, I think it's a blessing and a curse. Okay, we have 5 more minutes. If anyone else wants to ask questions, as a reminder, this webinar is being recorded, or it better have been recorded this whole time. I believe it is. It's being recorded. It'll be posted on the District 4 website. So you can share it with your sorry, I'm just following Harry's really great suggestions on kind of filtering these tutorials here. So you'll see that there are 20 main resources that you can download You can print these. I understand this is going green, but you can always print them to have as a reference in the meeting for your club if you are going through pathways and doing like a one-on-one session. One thing I would be cautious of, and another reason why I like pathways, is because it is easier to update resources on the internet and have that be updated everywhere versus discovering that 10 years later your club still has like the really old manuals and resources and outdated processes. So there's a method to the madness, but that's one of the other benefits that I find to just having all of this here and being able to be updated by Toastmasters International rather than every single club in the world has to fix the resources they already have printed out in their club materials. Okay, I'm going to go back to the slide really quick so you guys can jot this down if you'd like, or you've probably already received an email from me. Any other questions? Oh, okay. I guess that's it. So I guess we can end a few minutes early. But if you have any other questions, feel free to reach out. Otherwise, thank you so much for joining. This webinar would be really boring if you guys weren't here. Y'all were here. I'm trying to be more gender neutral and ask some questions. So I will hopefully see you all at the next TLI and have a good rest of your evening.